All right. We are ready to go. Alexander, we are live. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Sometimes tired. Today, not so much. I had a good night's sleep. My two twins were calm and quiet last night, and may continue to be so. But I've had. I'm less tired. I'm very well. It's a beautiful sunny day, and my gosh, the news is interesting. News in Europe, news as we're going to discuss in a moment in the United States. It's all the world. Things are really picking up now in a very, very interesting way. And since we are going to be talking about President Biden, Joe
Mm.
Biden, I saw today, as I got up this morning, as I was having my morning coffee, I shuffled around, looked through the news, and I saw that The Economist, which is up to now supported Biden, now has a title. I haven't read the article, but it says that Biden was set up to fail. Now, I'm not quite sure who's supposed to have set him up, but the fact is that it's an admission that we have a failing president and a failing administration, even from a journal like The Economist. And you see lots of now concerns, worries about this. And I understand that after a brief upward blip, which I never took seriously, a dead cat bounce, if you like, his poll ratings are falling again. His approval ratings are falling once more. So, unsurprising, we have a terrible inflation readout and 7%, as we predicted, except, of course, it's not actually 7%. It's somewhere in double figures. Of that, I am sure. I mean, I don't have the statistics behind me, but I think most people who look at this think that. And of course, it's always important to remember when we talk about inflation readouts, inflation figures in the United States, that they're distorted anyway, because a lot of prices that are rising, like house prices in particular, property prices, they're never tabulated within the inflation numbers. So that already creates a distortion. And that distortion, by the way, translates through to everything else that you read about the economy, because there's been lots of talk about how the US economy is booming. Don't believe it, because what almost certainly that boom amounts to is unreported inflation. If costs are rising, but they're not counted as inflation, then that distorts the GDP numbers. It can create an impression of growth, whereas in fact there is none. There's a statistician called John Williams who runs a website called Shadow Stats, who's made a whole business basically out of trying to recalculate the inflation numbers and recalculate the GDP numbers. I think he goes much too far. That's my sense in many of the things that he's been saying for many years. But he's repeatedly made that point about get the inflation numbers wrong and you're getting the GDP numbers wrong. And that point in itself is valid.
Yeah. What's going on in Sweden? 300%. I read something like 300% increase in energy prices
Ireland,
or
yeah.
something like that. I mean,
Yeah, no,
anyone in
absolutely.
Sweden, correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard something like 300% increase, like just something absolutely crazy.
Well, this is of course going on all around the world. It isn't just in Sweden, and we're going to have a massive energy price surge in Britain in April. And of course, anybody who thinks that the political problems that Boris Johnson is going through aren't somehow connected to the fact that Conservative MPs are getting extremely spooked about the fact that household fuel bills are going to shoot up in April, and they're worried about Johnson and how he's going to deal with all of that. I mean, that is undoubtedly part of his political problems. And it's a problem that affects everyone everywhere, even, I should say, in energy producing countries. And we talk a lot about Russia. We talked a lot about the Russian economy. I've explained many times, I've discussed many times how, in my opinion, the Russian economy is massively underestimated. It's much stronger than many people imagine. By the way, there is a good article in Foreign Policy, this frightful magazine that the US foreign policy establishment runs. There's a good article which touches on this, and the article is entitled "The Myth of Russian Decline," by the way. But Russia has its problems too, and they are affected by the inflation as everyone else has, except, of course, that they've got a real central bank, and they've managed to keep their debt problems under control. So the result is that they've been steadily raising interest rates, whereas the Fed, the Federal Reserve Board, is only now talking about doing so. And this is really disastrous, because what the Fed ought to have done in any rational economic system, if it was really worried about inflation, it should have started to edge up interest rates back in the spring, when it became clear that spending was running out of control. They didn't edge up interest rates. On the contrary, they persisted with QE long after it was no longer needed. They kept interest rates at impossibly low levels, almost zero. And the result was that they've assisted in this process of letting inflation take hold. And again, if people say to you that this has nothing to do with politics, if people tell you that the Fed wasn't trying to help the administration, Biden and the Democrats, I have a bridge to sell you. The Fed was itself coming up with that myth about inflation being transitory. Do you remember that's what they were saying? Because, of course, that's what the administration was saying. Now, of course, we see that, of course, it's not transitory after all. So the administration, with all its armies of economists, got it wrong. The Fed, with its even bigger army of economists, got it wrong. The Duran, two guys in Cyprus and London, we got it right. Now, I mean, what that tells you is not that, we're geniuses. What that tells you is that economic policy in the United States is entirely built around ideology and politics. It's completely politicized now. And there was this program by the Democrats, by the administration, to try to lock in an indefinite Democrat Party ascendancy by stoking up an economic boom. The Federal Reserve Board held its nose and went along with it, because they too don't want to see the orange man or people like him back. And of course, that policy has unraveled, and we now have inflation, and we have much higher inflation readouts and much more persistent inflation readouts than people were talking about this time last year. So that's where we are. And unsurprisingly, with the sense that everything is falling apart in the US, then his inflation numbers are falling. And his favorability numbers are falling. And of course, his other big sell was, that he was going to be the man who was going to run the pandemic better.
Coof killer.
The coup killer. And it's looking more likely.
Come on, man.
That the coof, politically, not physically, of course, politically is probably going to kill him. Because, as I said, he's not been able to control it. And this is where we're going to have to be incredibly careful, I'm afraid, in what we say on YouTube. But of course, we now see increasing numbers of court decisions going against him as well. The Supreme Court has now given a decision, which, to my mind, was the obvious one. I have to say I'm alarmed by one thing about that decision, which is that it was a 6-3 split. And the three who voted to support the policy, the OSHA policy, were the liberal justices, which, to my mind, given that, as far as I'm concerned, the legal position here is very clear. The fact that liberal justices are prepared to support a policy that is, I think, manifestly unconstitutional, that's my opinion, but the fact that they're prepared to do that again shows the degree of ideological and political capture of some judges. I mean, in the old days, There were liberal judges, there were conservative judges, there were liberal justices, there were conservative justices. But you would never have had them treat the Constitution in the way that those three justices did. And that does concern me, because a political judiciary, a politicized judiciary, is the high road to perdition. It's the high road to disaster. I'm very much hoping that at some point on a locals platform, we're going to be able to do a program with the great Robert Barnes, who obviously follows these cases with immense attention, and who is a constitutional lawyer, an American constitutional lawyer, which of course neither of us is, and we'll be able to hear his thoughts. He covered this case intensely. I don't know whether he had any actual role in the preparation for it, but I mean, he's part of the legal arguments. He's contributed to the legal arguments that were around this case, if you like. So he is somebody who can provide us with a wonderful informed commentary on what happened at the Supreme Court. So it seems to me failure from the administration's point of view on every front, every domestic front. We see, as I said, that the great O has turned out to be, a great challenge. It's confounding the president's predictions. We see that the inflation has not turned out as expected. We've had this bizarre speech about the filibuster. He's not going to take any more. I mean, it's quite bizarre. I mean, I suppose that's supposed to scare Manchin and the other one. I can't remember her name. I'm sure
Cinema.
It's not.
Yeah,
Cinema. I'm sure it's all it's going to do is going to increase their confidence in their own power. Because it's directed at. Let me be straightforward about this. And so we've had all this bluster, all this all this nonsense from the administration, and of course we haven't even started on foreign policy, where we have the administration now taking on the Russians. The Russians were working, as I've said, towards a plan. The US getting into a negotiation which arguably they should never have agreed to in the first place, because the president made a commitment in a summit meeting, which I'm sure many of his advisors are extremely annoyed and angry that he did make. So a negotiation that they should never have agreed to. And what we see again is a administration which is losing the initiative. Now, there's been much discussion about this negotiation. It's not actually a negotiation, these talks with the Russians. The important thing to understand what's happening from a political point of view is that the president isn't in control. The person who is in control of this process from this point on is Putin. He can dial things up, he can dial things down whenever he wishes. The US, the administration, is now reduced to responding to whatever Putin does. And we've now got today a big press conference from Lavrov. In a couple of days' time, sometime this month, Putin is going to do his annual address to the Russian parliament. He's got the administration guessing. He's got the administration worrying. It looks again very much as if the president, the administration, is not in command, is not in control, and the centerpiece of their foreign policy, which is confronting China in the Pacific, instead of that happening, they become distracted. They've been drawn again to this issue of Europe, which is not where they wanted to be. Remember all that talk earlier this year about wanting predictable and stable relations with Russia in Europe, so that they could focus on China instead. Well, look how it's turned out. Again, a consequence of a president not in control of his administration. So he wasn't able to control the hardliners, and also of a president who got maneuvered into discussions which he didn't want to get, which he shouldn't have allowed the United States to get drawn into, with the result that the European allies, or at least some of them, are becoming increasingly stressed and nervous, as you see with stuttering comments from the likes of Stoltenberg and historical ones from the likes of Borrell. And at the same time, the administration itself is increasingly showing signs of splits, with Sullivan taking a more conciliatory line towards the Russians, Blinken taking a harder line, and that mirrored further down in the hierarchy with Wendy Sherman, who has to talk to the Russians, also trying to take a conciliatory line against Victoria Nuland, who wants to take the hardest possible line. So that's where we are. An administration that is losing control on every front: economic, political, diplomatic, and of course, the American people. They may not be able to articulate every single point in the way that we've just done on this program, but they sense the malaise, and of course, they support authorities draining away.
Yeah, 33% approval, and Kamala's not doing any better.
No.
And boy, did she have a train wreck of an interview yesterday. No. My God.
Yeah.
Biden goes to Congress and he starts yelling at everyone as he's giving like his speech. Yeah. And then he goes, and I don't understand that he's at the White House and he does these press conferences, but he doesn't do them from the Oval Office where he has everything set up. Yeah. Or inside the White House. He has to go across the street to this made up little theater.
Yes.
It is so freaking bizarre. And he sits behind this little desk like he's a little child.
Yes.
And the press sits in like this auditorium and they ask him questions. And he doesn't answer any of the questions.
No.
He just kind of brushes them off and then walks away. It is so bizarre.
It's a very bad look. I mean, it's very weird, actually. It's almost
who thought this up?
Who thought this up exactly? I mean, he seems to have some very, very strange people advising him. That's all I can say about that. It's very, very, very weird. But as I said, authority is draining away. Comparisons with Jimmy Carter are increasingly being made. Somebody, Edward Luce, in the financial...
Carter.
I was going to say Edward Luce, who I don't agree with on most things in the Financial Times, made exactly the point you've just made, an insult to Jimmy Carter. I mean, he looked like a commanding figure by comparison with this. At least Carter had, was a philosopher. I mean, a bizarre person in some ways to have in the White House, but at least he had more than two brain cells to rub together. He was articulate. He was intelligent in a kind of a way, naive in very many ways, perhaps not the best administrator, whatever, but at least he was a presence. This is just an empty suit with everything falling apart around him.
Yeah. It's so bad that they're talking about Hillary.
Yeah.
That's how bad it is.
Yes. Which, of course, to be very clear about this, talking about Hillary like that, it must be a massive invitation to the orange man that they're getting so scared about, because of course if he took her on and beat her once, he must be saying to himself, I can take her on and beat her all over again, which I think he would, by the way. I don't think any feelings towards Hillary have changed since 2016. On the contrary,
it's the worst idea.
It's the worst idea. I mean, on the contrary, I think what it illustrates is the utter bankruptcy, intellectual, moral, political, of the Democratic Party, or at least of the DNC.
Yeah. Oh boy. All right. Over 300% in Norway as well. And yes, Kurt says it is. Sweden, 300% energy crisis. Yeah, we're paying for it in Europe as well.
Absolutely.
That's what sucks.
Yeah.
All of it, this Biden train wreck affects the entire planet.
Everybody knows it's true. Of course, nobody wants to say so. I mean, to be clear, I mean, the Europeans have contributed to many of these follies. I mean, energy policy in Europe is a complete and utter shambles and has been for a long time. But so we've played our part in these follies. And of course, QE in Europe has been just as bad as in the US, worse, in fact. But it is the US which is in pole position. And remember, when he became president a year ago, his position looked incredibly strong. He'd seen off the challenge from Donald Trump. There'd been issues about the election. Well, he won out over the battle about the election. There was the events in Capitol Hill that seemed to work in his favor as well. He took over a booming economy. It was recovering strongly. If he played his cards, if the Democrats had played their cards with more restraint, with a more measured way, they would be in a completely different position today. But of course they didn't, because they wanted to transform America. You remember Chuck Schumer saying that? He said, we win those 2 seats in Georgia, we will transform America. They won those 2 seats in Georgia. They went out to transform America. And look where they are. Look where all of us are.
Yeah, they didn't transform anything. The only thing they transformed are Pelosi's eyebrows. That's the only thing that I've seen transformed. But anyway, Alexander, welcome everybody to the live stream. Let's say hello to our moderators, Alexander. Let me see who's here with us. Cosmic Rain is with us. Alan Watson is with us. I saw Zarael somewhere in there as well. I know Zarael is in the house as well. And who else is helping us? Reckless Abandon is in the house. He is with us as well. Thank you to our moderators. Welcome everybody to the live stream. Welcome everybody from Locals. Welcome to the Locals chat. A lot of good comments coming in from the Locals chat here. No one was surprised by the liberal judges. Robert Barnes suggested it would come down to the 3 judges.
Yeah, I mean,
Robert Barnes.
It's something I'd like to talk about with him, actually. I mean, it worries me. That really concerns me a lot. I mean, maybe I'm behind the curve on this, and maybe this is probably, I'm sure it's been going on for a very long time. But I mean, it's something that worried me to the core. It reminded me of the Assange decision in London, actually.
What worries me even...
Yeah, go on.
No, you were saying the Assange decision?
Politicized judges.
Yeah.
And that is a really bad thing. Judges who don't follow the law, and in the United States, the Constitution, but judges who follow the party line. I mean, that is something that historically we've not seen in the United States, or at least we hadn't seen in the United States that I remember. Maybe this has been going on for longer than I know, but it's very, very disturbing, and it really troubles me. Well,
6-3 on the OSHA, but 6. What was it? What was it? 5-4 on the
other one. Indeed, and
look, and that was Kavanaugh. That's
Kavanaugh
what worries me. Kavanaugh
and Roberts, exactly.
And Roberts, we know about. Roberts, we know that he's more. Roberts is much more liberal, I think, than on the conservative. But Kavanaugh is also just very, very shaky.
He's very shaky. I suspect, in part, I mean, he's been very, very hurt. I mean, politically hurt. His confidence has been shaken by the whole business of his Senate approval process. That terrible confirmation, those terrible confirmation hearings, and I mean, he comes across to me as somebody who's trying to tell the Democrats, look, I'm not such a bad guy after all. I'm with you on some things. A terrible position to be in, a contemptible one, actually, for a judge. It's not going to win him any friends. It's going to lose him friends. It's going to lose him respect. But that's where we are.
Yeah. Hello to Peru and Chicago and Sweden and Norway and Australia. Australia. And once again, you guys take out Djokovic's visa again. My God, you hear about that?
Yeah, I did hear about that. Yes. I mean,
what a train wreck.
Once upon a time, again, this is, we're talking about politicized decision making. I mean, that would have been considered an abusive process. I mean, maybe the government has that kind of power, but for the government to withdraw a visa after a court has essentially reinstated it, I mean, that would have been, once upon a time, the outcry that would have provoked from every side of the political divide. People, once upon a time, in Western democracies, cared about these things. Political leaders cared about these things. They understood that these things mattered, that they were in fact the fabric upon which societies, democratic Western societies, were based. And now, of course, that's all been thrown away because, of course, Western societies no longer, at the level of their establishment, have people in charge who either understand democracy or support it.
Yeah. Build back better. We said it. Legal nihilism. You have to tear
Absolutely.
down the legal system,
Yeah.
remove trust in the legal system. You know what else you have to tear down? You have to tear down sports and athletics.
Absolutely.
And these events as well.
Well, quite, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, you know, they always say that sports, people who are into sports, they develop self-confidence. They are able to make decisions themselves. Bear in mind, you know, that the ancient Greeks, who all about democracy, at least the Athenians were very much into sports. They created sports. They invented the whole concept of sports, the Olympic Games and all the rest. So, and it was partly because, as I said, it was all about the citizen being, you know, strong and vigorous and confident, self-confident, and therefore able to participate in the political process. So perhaps some people sense that at some level, and they're not really that keen on sports and on activity anymore. Who's to say?
Yeah. Sports also brings people together.
Yeah.
Can't have
well,
that.
that's right. That's also true. Brings them together in large groups. That's also always an alarming and worrying thing. Yeah. You don't want them together, you want them apart.
Yeah. And now you're going to have to separate them. So people that can actually go watch the events are going to have the jabs. Yeah. People that don't have the jabs can't go to the events. Yeah. And pretty soon it'll be, you can only go to the events if you have the digital ID or the right social credit score.
Absolutely.
So people that cheer this on, they're just cheering on, you know, their own demise. But anyway, Robert Barnes suggested it would come down to 3 judges. Robert Barnes, Viva Frey, Nick Raqueta are amazing. Justice Sotomayor is apparently CNN's sole viewer. Yeah, she's more of an activist than a judge.
Yeah,
it seems.
Yeah. Well, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's see here, Victoria.
Well, can I say Sotomayor, or whatever her name is, the justice? I hope I got her name right.
Sotomayor.
Sotomayor. Anyway, I mean, she does come across to me as more of an activist than a judge. I mean, to be straightforward about it. I mean, the way she talks, her arguments are not the kind of arguments that I would have expected a judge to make. And the kind of reasoning that she follows is not the sort of reasoning I would have expected from a jurist.
Yeah. Let Victoria Nuland pick up a rifle and stand a post. Yeah. That's a lot of damage in 1 year. 3 more years to go. It is a lot of damage in one. He did a lot of damage in 1 week. DeSantis 2024. Hillary's hated in America.
Yeah.
Let's see. The risk of Putin driving the agenda is that this has made the Russia hawks in the administration and the MIC apoplectic. The potential for miscalculation when there are so many captains of the U.S. ship of state is enormous.
That is an extremely good comment. That is profoundly right. I don't know whether people saw how many people watched Tony Blinken's press conference of a week ago. I mean, my jaw dropped as I was watching it. I mean, he was so angry that he came across to me as almost deranged. And I think what another thing that factored into that anger was that he just received reports from the State Department and from the Treasury saying that if they imposed the kind of sanctions that have been talked about on Russia, it would tip the US itself into recession. And that's obviously not something I think that the DNC especially would want to see. But he was absolutely incandescent. And the things he was saying, and not just on that Friday, but, you know, over interviews which followed, were just, as I said, they were weird. And the same, by the way, for Victoria Nuland, who's also been talking. I mean, comments that are just beyond belief. They're so visceral. And it's not just in the US. You come to Europe, there was an equally deranged statement from Josep Borrell, the EU's High Representative of Foreign Affairs, who talks about, you know, the Russians wanting to change the entire security architecture of Europe and how outrageous that is. Well, it's perfectly true. The Russians do want to change the entire security architecture of Europe. But why is that outrageous? Why is it outrageous for the Russians, who are, never forget, a European country? Why would they not be interested in revising a European security architecture which they consider unfavorable to themselves? You don't have to agree with them. You can push back on many of the things that they're coming up with. But the way Borrell was talking about it was just outrageous that the Russians should even suggest such a thing. And these peace people, the Borrells, the Newlands, the Blakens, people like that, they're very, very powerful. And they still pull a lot of the levers of power. And of course, they have the MI6 behind them. So, that's why these talks that took place this week have ended in deadlock. And that's why we see all these very weird and wonderful sanctions proposals now passing through the Senate. I ought to say, by the way, about those sanctions proposals, that in reality, the Menendez bill strongly suggests to me that the sanctions have been quietly watered down. One of the things that really struck me straight away about them is that instead of a blanket cut-off of SWIFT to all Russian banks, it's only going to be certain Russian banks and financial institutions that would stand to be cut off from SWIFT. Now, in practice, I think if we ever were to enter into a sanctions war, I can't imagine that other Russian banks would continue to use SWIFT in that kind of situation. But it's clear that there's some kind of negotiation going on, and that there's some kind of attempt to draw some of the sting out of these sanctions because of fears about the way it could backfire on the US. And of course, they've also pulled back on some of the sanctions that Ted Cruz was trying to impose on Nord Stream 2. So because they're actually dialing back a little on the sanctions, though I stress again, I don't think it has any practical significance, but because they're trying to dial back on the sanctions, they are trying to cover that by ludicrous ideas like sanctioning Putin himself, a nonsensical thing, something that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, but something which the Russians would treat as beyond provocative. And that's really bluster to try, as I said, to conceal from us the fact that the sanctions package that is being proposed is not quite as strong or as devastating as some of the reports a few weeks ago were suggesting.
Yeah, but they're always doing sanctions like every 3 months, sooner or later. And now you're saying they're going to do a little bit of the banks are going to fall into this SWIFT sanctions. Sooner or later, they're going to end up having to get all the banks. Sooner or later, they're going to place sanctions on Putin, or they're going to do something stupid there. They can't reverse gear. And
no,
that's
absolutely.
The problem.
That's the point.
Yeah,
they might have retreated slightly because, as I said, some people in the DNC are getting nervous. But the reality is that there's that famous expression by Chekhov that if you have a loaded gun in the first act, it's going to be shot. It's going to shoot in the last act. Sooner or later, all of these sanctions are going to be imposed. All of the ones that we've been hearing about. The Russians know it. The Russians have known this ever since 2014. If you look at Russian economic policy, ever since 2014, they have been steadily working towards insulating their country from the kind of total sanctions blockade that the United States, that the hardliners in the United States are one day going to manage to impose. So situations like Russia, for example, borrowing on the international bond markets, well, that's stopped. I mean, they don't do that anymore. Russia has set up its own alternative to SWIFT. Russia is going ahead with its various import substitution programs. It's because it's exactly what Alex has just said. Whatever minor retreat they make now, sooner or later, we are going to get to this destination, this point, which Newland wants us to get to. And that is inevitable.
Yeah, it's also inevitable that they're destroying the dollar.
Yeah, Absolutely.
That's the end game in all of this. The more they continue to do this, the more they just set up the de-dollarization.
Absolutely. That's exactly where we're heading, because, of course, what we now see is the Russians and the Chinese and other countries are now working on setting up their alternative financial architecture. And that will be the financial architecture of a bloc analogous in economic power, comparable in economic power to that of the West. And that is something the West has never experienced before, at least the United States has never experienced before. So instead of one financial system, even during the Cold War, there was one global financial system. The Soviet Union operated outside that global financial system, but it didn't have a rival to it. This time, instead of one global financial system, we're going to end up with two. And that is unprecedented. I don't think there's ever been a period in history where that has happened.
Yeah. Every move that the Biden administration makes, it's like it's specifically geared to destroy the United States, it seems, or to just make things worse than where they were before. I mean, even the OSHA judgments, even though they got obliterated on the OSHA, but they did win on the fact that people in the medical business, the medical industry, they have to get jabbed, right, because of Medicare and Medicaid. That's also going to come back and bite them, because all that's going to happen is you're going to have more medical professionals walking off.
Exactly.
And it's just going to cause more, strain on the healthcare system that they're always talking about. It's just going to cause more strain on the healthcare system. Even the OSHA, Citigroup is going to be firing a bunch of people today, from what I understand, people that refuse to get jabbed.
Yeah.
Because the one thing about the OSHA decision is that private companies can still decide if they want to let people go.
Yes.
And it's just going to it's going to cause more trouble in the economy.
Yeah.
Every single move he's making is a disaster. Every single one.
Yes.
I mean, you can't be this bad.
No.
No.
Well, it's what happens when ideology takes control. When you are running things not on the basis of facts, but on the basis of ideology. Because at that point, you lose touch with reality. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to reshape the facts to fit your ideology instead of making your policy fit the facts. So you can imagine what happens that way. I mean, the Soviet Union is an extreme case in that. Is an extreme example of that, because one of the reasons the Soviets passed up repeated opportunities to carry out reorganizations in their economy and their society was because there were always ideological objections. And we're into exactly the same situation with the United States today. Only in some ways, I think it's happening at much greater speed than what we saw in the Soviet Union, where these problems really only began to crystallize over a period of 30 years. In the US, it's going to take much less time.
I'm telling you, you can't get to the midterms fast enough.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really.
Yeah.
I don't even know if that's going to help the situation. It'll help, but I mean,
well,
I've never seen such a train wreck of an administration in any country.
Well, the risk is that you're going to end up with a Republican wipeout in Congress, but the Republicans will not be able to find a way to get the administration itself out of the White House. So we're going to end up with a complete paralysis. I mean, this won't be what people talk about, the deadlock, the gridlock that people talk about. It'll be something much worse, because even during earlier periods of supposed gridlock, periods when the White House and Congress have been controlled by different parties, there was always some degree of give and take. I think this time it's going to be much worse than that, because one side of that, the White House side, is so completely disorganized, and you're going to see what you're going to see in that case is major splits within the White House itself, between people who want to start to accommodate, at least in some way, to the realities, and the ideologues who would regard any attempt to do so as a betrayal, and who will inevitably be saying, and indeed who already are saying, that the reason things are going so badly wrong is not because our ideology is wrong or our policies are wrong. It's because we have not been extreme enough. And you can already see some people on the sort of so-called progressive wing of the Democratic Party and their media commentators and allies in the media talking in that way. The argument is that Biden is failing not because he's been overambitious, but because he hasn't been sufficiently ambitious. In other words, what he should have done was rammed his foot on the accelerator even more. So that's what you're going to be seeing.
Yeah. They double, they triple, they quadruple down.
Yeah.
It's all politicians all over the world.
Well, yes, but
that's why they can't back off.
Absolutely. Well, indeed, ideologues take it a whole stage further.
Yeah.
That's why they can't back off. In fact, there's been two brilliant articles, one in the Financial Times by a senior fellow of the Rand Corporation, which is an interesting fact in itself, by the way, and several articles actually, but one particularly outstanding one by Anatole Levin in Responsible Statecraft and on his own, on the Quincy Institute's blog, in which they both make the point that one of the everybody in NATO says to each other, and if you talk to them in private, they all say, no way is NATO ever going to agree to Ukraine joining. And they all accept that. They all, in practice, accept that. But they can't openly admit it because they're frightened that if they do, they will lose face. And the Financial Times, the man from the Rand Corporation, the point he was making is that this isn't a strong policy. It's a dishonest one. And like every dishonest policy, it's going to eventually fall apart. But it's ultimately, it always comes down to this issue of face. You can't pull back. You can't retreat, because if you do, you fear that you're going to lose face. And that's more important to you than achieving a real, a sustainable outcome.
Yeah, but on the flip side, where does NATO go? You see, that's the whole problem. They don't want to. They don't want to stop. They don't want to say we're going to stop here.
Yeah.
They don't want to backtrack. So the only direction for them to keep moving is eastwards.
Well,
that means Ukraine and Georgia.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe Sweden. Finland, from what I understand, is a no-go. The people in Finland don't want to join NATO, but Sweden's in play.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there is no no solution here, because the minute NATO doesn't want to put a stop to their expansion, then the only direction for them to go is eastward.
Yes, exactly.
And all it is a grift. There's no reason for the United States to be. We did a video on this. There's no reason for the United States to be funding NATO anymore.
Absolutely, of course.
There's no reason for the American people to pay for NATO.
NATO
has no purpose.
That is exactly right.
Mission.
That's exactly right. I mean, beyond the people who are worried about loss of face, there's the ideologues and straightforwardly the grifters, the bureaucracies in Brussels, not just the NATO bureaucracy, but the EU bureaucracy, who needs to keep these outfits, NATO and the EU, relentlessly expanding, because that's the only way this thing can continue to justify itself. It's like the bicycle that has to keep running forward, because if it stops, it will fall over. Now, of course, the problem they have is even though they don't want to acknowledge the fact publicly, NATO at least, and in practice the EU also, has now hit the buffers. The Russians have said no, and there is no way you can get around that. When they talk about it's absolutely unacceptable that the Russians should be granted a veto on other countries' NATO memberships. The Russians have a veto over Ukraine's and Georgia's membership, and they've just exercised it. That is the practical reality. But of course, the people in Brussels will never acknowledge it, or at least not willingly.
Yeah, you know what's going to happen. The COOF policy in the United States has fallen apart. I think what they wanted to do for the COOF, the mandates and the passports, is completely collapsing.
Yeah. Yes.
That plan is no go. Okay, Europe is still in play. Canada, Australia. Okay, we're still trying to work this passport digital ID build back better thing. But in the United States, I think it's falling apart.
Yes,
and there's
Britain
nothing.
Britain also.
Bravo, and Britain too. The UK, isn't that interesting? The UK and the US are the two places where we've seen this entire Great Reset, Build Back Better, digital ID, passports, all that stuff just hit a wall.
Yes.
And it's the people that are just saying no.
Exactly.
No, we're not going to put up with this. And if we put up with this, Boris Johnson, you're out. And anyone else that comes in to replace Boris, if you guys put a plan B together or whatever, we're going to vote you out as well. In the United States, you have Biden, who's completely lost and clueless, and his entire COOF policy is completely just dead. No one's putting up with it. DeSantis is going to do whatever he wants. In Texas, they're doing whatever they want. A lot of states are saying we're not going to implement digital IDs. We're not going to go the mandate route. The Supreme Court is also putting a stop to it. So those two places, it's falling apart. The economies are falling apart. Inflation everywhere, energy crisis all over. It's just a terrible economic situation.
Yes.
There is no other direction for them to go other than some sort of conflict.
Yes.
Some sort of war. That is the only thing that I can think of that is going to, that in their mind, they believe will save them some face and will get the people to rally around their leaders. In other words, I could see them sitting there in DC thinking, you know what? Biden is a freaking disaster. We don't have a vice president.
Yes.
We don't have a speaker of the House that can we have no one to take over. Our only option is some sort of conflict where maybe the American people will rally around our president.
Yes.
That's the only thing I can think of them doing, because everything else, Alexander, has collapsed. Everything has collapsed.
Yes. Yes.
Once again, Europe, okay, we still have this digital ID lockdown dream in our heads, but whatever. Europe's always behind the US by a few months and years.
It's going to
we're heading towards conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And I mean, can I just say, and this is a vitally important thing to understand, all the people who are talking about imminent war in Europe at the moment are from the West. The Russians are not saying that there's going to be a war this month, this year in Europe. Obviously, they've built up their military power in European Russia. But as I've discussed many times, both here on the Duran and on my own channel and on locals live streams, this has been an incremental build-up that's been going on for some time. And it is a response to Western and Ukrainian actions. They're not planning, I'm quite sure of this, they're not planning an attack on Ukraine now, but they are getting prepared, they are getting ready for the day when a conflict comes. And in the meantime, they're also preparing to take what they're going to call countermeasures, things that will counter-contain the United States, counter-intimidate the United States. So all the talk about war is from the West. It's from the United States, from some of its European allies, from people in Brussels. Now, I think that you're absolutely right. This partly serves a political agenda. The idea is you hold everything together that way. You get people to rally around your president. I think these people who do not understand war, conflict, military things, they're overwhelmingly civilians, are playing with fire. And I think also politically, they are catastrophically misjudging the mood of their own people. I had a very, very interesting, I'm on receipt of various circulars, which various people circulate, on private email lists. And I get one from somebody who works in Congress. And he was actually making precisely this point. He was basically telling the various people in Congress that he's in contact with, if you really want a conflict, you are completely losing track of the feelings of your electoral base. People there do not want a conflict, and they will sense very, very quickly if a conflict is being manufactured in order to win them over. Instead of winning them over, it will make them angry, and it will make them protest and oppose you even more strongly than they are doing at the moment. So, they're getting these warnings, but of course, I don't think they understand that. I don't think they're capable in some ways of understanding it or of negotiating with reality. And besides, coming back to the point that you've made, what other option do they have from their point of view? If it's war or lose politically, well, some of them will say, let's have a war rather than lose. If we lose with the war, well, at least it'll be the same for us as if we've lost in some other way. We're not going to lose anything more than we would if we just went ahead and had a war. And that's, of course, terrible type of thinking, but some of these people do think in that way.
Yeah. Let's get some super chats in. Dominique, thank you for your super chat. And Mark Hewitt says, what effect on the French presidential election if Macron Marichal came out and supported Eric Zemmour? Marian.
Somebody more familiar with French politics than me needs to answer that question. The more endorsements, high-level endorsements Zemmour gets, the more convincing and credible he looks as a potential president. I think the problem at the moment for Zemmour is that he comes across so far, or at least to a great extent, as a protest leader rather than a genuine alternative president. If he starts getting high-level top endorsements, then people might start to think of him as an alternative president, and that could cause support around him to harden. So I'm not talking about this particular endorsement because I'm not that familiar with French politics, at least not anymore. 30 years ago, 30 years ago, I used to travel to France regularly, and I used to know French politics as well as I know British politics or American politics, but I don't any longer. But as I said, I don't know about this endorsement, but the more endorsements, top level, strong endorsements he gets, the stronger his position becomes.
Yeah. Dominique with a 99 euro super chat. Awesome.
Wow.
Thank you, Dominique, for
Thank
that.
you.
Support after PayPal attack. You were right when you said they will double down on censorship. It's frightening. It's frightening. Am I right when I remember a time it would have been impossible and would have been denounced vigorously by all the press, especially from the left?
Well, of course it would have been. That's what is so astonishing about this. I mean, the left always used to be the most outspoken in denouncing censorship. I want to stress that again, though. I mean, we mustn't say that people on the right were in favor of censorship. A lot of people on the right, most people on the right, were opposed to censorship also. And if you're talking about the United States, the one group in US society that's made constant on this, who are utterly opposed to censorship, are the libertarians on the right, and people like them. But the left always used to, at least the old left that I remember, were always hostile to censorship. Now, of course, they've become the most vigorous censors. And not just the most vigorous censors, they've become the most authoritarian and in their policies, the most anti-democratic. You want to see proof of that? Just look at that Supreme Court decision and the way those 3 liberal judges voted.
Yeah, agree with you there. Kurt says the Biden administration has only one hope, and it is the more often a stupidity is repeated, it sometimes gives the appearance of wisdom. True.
True enough. So true.
They don't have much hope in a lot of things, so maybe they'll just repeat the stupidities they say.
Absolutely. The only thing I would say about that is that I strongly suspect that in practice it's going to turn out the other way, in that the more stupidities that they make and repeat, the more people will think them stupid. That's my rather cynical take on that. The point is brilliant, and I understand exactly what is being said there. And I think the cynicism is justified. I think that's fully correct.
Yeah. Gordon, thank you very much for your super sticker. Elena Diaz says, please, can you fix the link to Alexander's live from Wednesday on Locals? Thank you for your analysis. So appreciate it. Actually, I think there's there was two streams that were open. I'll delete the one that didn't play, and I'll just leave the one that did play up there. I'll do that after this live stream and fix that.
I'm very sorry about that. There was a host of technical problems. I'm going to quickly say, I mean, they're doing all kinds of works to lay cables and things all around my house here in North London. It's all over North London, and I'm afraid that means internet is sometimes gets cut off at odd moments, and then it resumes. And I'm afraid I think during that period, something like that, so we ended up with two streams instead of one.
Yeah, I'll take a look at it and remove the one.
Ryan, and in fairness, I should quickly add that I'm also not the most tech savvy person, and I say that, and I should perhaps also apologize. I'm sure maybe somebody else, and Alex running the thing, would have noticed this much sooner, would have dealt with it.
We'll fix it.
Yeah.
These things are easy to fix. Ryan says, what comments on Bulgaria uprising? I know they are an EU NATO country, but how much longer will Eastern European Balkan nations accept and capitulate to Brussels? Is the coup straining EU relations?
You know, the thing about Bulgaria, if you know Bulgaria well, and I mean, I used to know, again, it was one of those countries I used to know extremely well. My sister-in-law is Bulgarian, but I mean, I haven't been there for a long, long time. It's a very, very orderly, very quiet country. It's not the sort of place where people, protest easily. It's not like Greece, well, at least the Greece that used to be, or Romania, for example, where one gets the sense that people are much more, the political culture is more fiery. So I think it will take a lot to happen before you get anything like an uprising of the kind that you're talking about in Bulgaria. I do remember in the 90s, there was a moment when an uprising of a sort did occur, and the parliament building in Sofia was stormed and set on fire. But my very, very strong assessment of that, and I remember that at the time, was that was one of our Western fabricated, EU fabricated events. And it was very much directed, as I remember, against the sort of people that, were opposed to EU integration and all that sort of thing. So that was a synthetic affair. I think for something big to happen in Bulgaria itself, it will take a very long time. I'm not saying it will never happen, but I'm saying it will take time.
Did you see people stuck in the parliament looking out as the crowds were trying to enter the door?
Oh, well, indeed.
They were worried.
Oh, no, they were worried, as I said. But as I said, for this to really take that form, it's going to, I mean, we'll see anyway. We'll see what will happen. I don't think we're quite there yet. I think we're some distance from it in Bulgaria itself. Of course, if it happens in Bulgaria, converse of what I'm saying, then it can happen everywhere, across the Balkans, across Eastern Europe. In fact, it could very easily set the Balkans on fire, because, again, the perception in the Balkans, in Eastern Europe, in Southeastern Europe, is that the Bulgarians are a law-abiding, solid, peaceful people. If they're driven to those sort of things, then it will. A lot of other people will follow them.
Yeah. Freedom Autopsy Report says Biden is mentally disabled and Harris is an incompetent diversity pick. For the first time since 1945, America is vulnerable.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. In fact, I'm going to say something. It's more vulnerable than it has been even during the Second World War, because in the Second World War, whatever challenges the US faced, it had leadership. I mean, I know a lot of people have strong feelings about FDR, one way and the other, but he was a powerful personality, and he was in charge, and he had people like George Marshall, advising him, and extraordinary people. Henry Stimson was his, defense secretary. They had leadership in the United States in those days. What do we have now? Just what the viewer has said.
Come on, man.
Come on, man.
Radovid says, thumbs up, like the stream, spread the message. Thank you, Radovid, for that super chat. Yifan Zhang sends us a super sticker. Thank you very much for that. Hunger says, in Lebanon, Syria, and Turkey, US dollar is still treated like gold due to
Mm.
hyperinflation. What can be done to stabilize the East Med economies?
That is a huge story. I mean, the trouble is, of course, we have to understand that in Syria, it's partly induced this crisis with the Syrian currency, with the Syrian economy, is partly a product of the sanctions that have been imposed on the country, the very ferocious sanctions, and of course, the fact that the country's still at war. I mean, we mustn't assume that the war in Syria is completely over. They're still fighting in Idlib. Large areas of Syria in the east and south remain under foreign occupation. There's lots going on in Syria, which explains why the currency there is weak. And some of that undoubtedly has, spread to Lebanon. And the reason why there's a crisis in Lebanon is partly because of the conflict in Syria and the collapse of the Syrian economy, but it's also partly because of the massive structural faults within a Lebanese society, and also, to be straightforward about it, the fact that there is some opposition around the world, not just some, lots of opposition around the world to the outsized role of Hezbollah in Lebanese politics, and that has increased the economic pressure on Lebanon. So one has to fix the politics. One has to restore order and functioning government and functioning institutions, and have proper economies and proper tax systems and all those sort of things in these countries, in Syria, in Lebanon, and those sort of places, before the currency there stabilizes. And that is a massive, massive undertaking. It can be done. Someday it will be done, but it will take a very long time. Turkey is another issue again, because there we have an economic policy which, as far as I'm concerned, is becoming increasingly reckless and irrational. And Turkey has intrinsically a strong economy. It's a big country. It's got a large, educated middle class. It's not short of natural resources. Should be a strong economy, but it has been so eccentrically managed for such a long time that, as I said, the danger of hyperinflation now is very real. And what has to happen there is that there has to be a completely new a new government, which has to try to bring the whole situation under control. And that's going to be difficult as well.
Yeah. Guys, don't forget Lebanon is in the middle of a Kazakhstan-style coup. Also,
yeah.
It's constantly been been under fire.
Yes.
Let's see. The English loyalist says since January 6th, it has been Happy Dance Day for Jimmy Carter. Now that he is off the hook.
So true. He's all over the place. I mean, how old is he now? He's 100 or something like that. I mean, but he's busy writing articles, and of course, the Democratic Party now is hailing him as this saint. So the thing about Carter, whatever else he was, I mean, he wasn't corrupt. I mean, not that I remember anyway. I mean, so he does, remind people.
No 10% for the big guy.
Exactly. It's exactly. Well, that's the point. So I mean, he is in that respect somebody the Democrats can put up, who comes across as well-meaning and clean, even though, as I said, he's almost a centenarian now.
Mike, thank you for your super chat. Gordon, thank you for your super chat. Thank you very much, guys. Ryan says, it's the Supreme Court. The 3 liberal activist hacks did not ask one question on the law or the Constitution. It's a degradation of the justice system.
It's absolutely. And I have to say, I still feel shocked about it. I mean, everybody knows. I mean, I'm sure everybody who's watched our programs knows how profoundly shocked I was by the High Court's decision in Britain over Julian Assange, which I found so bizarre that I just couldn't compute it as a decision that judges could make. As far as I'm concerned, that's just my take of it. And I have to say, I feel the same about these 3 liberal judges in the Supreme Court. Whether you're a liberal or you're a conservative, when you're a judge and you're hearing a case, you put that all aside. It's the law that you serve, not your political masters.
Kavanaugh worries me. Anyway, he worries me.
I mean, but if you're serving political masters, you're not in any true sense a judge anymore.
Yeah. All right. Alexandros is a new member to the Duran community. Welcome, Alexandros. And Magnesia Shan says, I'm no economic surgeon, but it makes sense for anyone, including Nancy, to invest in industries that are mostly sure, so they can indeed work. Yeah. Nancy is she's quite the investor.
Oh yeah,
she's quite the investment genius, isn't she?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, she's the greatest investment genius of all time. I mean, she puts money in things which absolutely. I mean, absolutely. She. I mean, one has to say this. I mean, of course, there have been some malicious rumors that she's been getting inside information as a result of her position in Nancy would never ever do a thing like that.
Come on, Alexander, you can't say stuff like that.
Can't say stuff like that. Of course not. Yeah.
If you say stuff like that, it's racist.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You can't say stuff like that about Nancy. She's an incredible investment mind. She knows exactly where to put money.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. I mean,
Divine Insurgent said, it's one thing really to have open, liberal, democratic societies, but what is taking place now are abuses of power and authoritarianism. I say this because it has become bandwagon to chastise democracy.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Yes, I mean, awesome point. Actually, well done.
Well said. Alexandros says, I'm moving to Thessaloniki in January. Change is on its way. Good night, United Nations. Goodbye, European Union.
Yeah.
Well, Thessaloniki, where are you moving from, Alexandros?
Yeah. From Athens, perhaps?
From where? But Thessaloniki, it's a cool city.
It's a cool
city. Have you been?
Oh, yeah, of course. Many times. I mean, it's
nice
a
city.
Magnificent city and an amazing cuisine, different from that of Central Greece, more richer in some ways. If I can put it like that. I don't mean better. I mean, but richer. And amazing Byzantine churches. Yeah. And, of course, there's the
nice downtown.
And extraordinary monuments. Yeah. A wonderful museum of antiquities. I mean, and you have you can go to all these places, Vergina, all these Dodoni, all these places around about. So they're just astonishing. The place near Olympia, which are Theon, near Olympia, Mount Olympus. It's an amazing place, but yeah.
And you can take your car and you can drive up to Bulgaria. You can go all throughout Eastern Europe. It's really a nice location.
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Good for you. Thessaloniki is a beautiful place. Raphael says, guys, more than ever before, I am 100% sure we are seeing the end of the Red Anglo-Saxon coalition. Biden and Boris, two Bs, are not helping out also. Boris, thank you, Raphael, for that. Boris is in deep
very, very deep trouble. Yeah. Again, it's all what is extraordinary about it is then this he is very similar to Biden. I mean, he came in as prime minister 2 years ago in such a strong position. And the speed with which he squandered it, thrown it all away, has been staggering. And he's made one unforced error after another. And a lot of it, in Boris's case, is sheer self-indulgence. I ought to say I don't like his economic policies either. I mean, he shares one.
He raised the taxes, didn't he?
Absolutely. He shares the same propensity with Biden for unconstrained spending, which he tries to pay for through taxes. And of course, we have again the same issue of ultra low interest rates, QE programs, all the same bag of tricks that you see in the US. And undoubtedly, that's causing problems in Britain. And this is on top of a historic policy mistake that the British authorities have been making for as long as I can remember, at least all my adult life, which is that they try to goose up the GDP figures by stimulating the housing market. So we've had this massively unbalanced, overblown, over-indebted housing market, which has been getting bigger and more bloated with every economic cycle. And that is an extremely dangerous thing within the British economy. It's creating, I think, increasing instabilities. And of course, Boris came along and he did that. He overstimulated it again, exactly like every Conservative and Labour government that I've lived through has also done.
Reach says North Korea has tested a ballistic missile or a hypersonic glide vehicle successfully. That's why it's difficult to do regime change there. Great.
Well, I mean, that's a very good point. I mean, I'm not sure it was a hypersonic glide vehicle. One can be a little careful about accepting North Korean accounts of what they're doing, but it is unquestionably the case that technologically they've advanced much faster and much further than anybody in the West imagined, in the US especially, imagined they would do. And of course, realistically, the idea now of a regime change war against North Korea is just off the table. I mean, because North Korea has nuclear weapons and advanced missiles, and maybe it's still a stretch for it to reach the US with those missiles, but it can certainly reach Japan and Korea. And
Trump was close to getting a deal worked out until Bolton completely sabotaged that one.
Absolutely. Without Bolton, of course, and people like him having anything alternative to offer as a strategy, more of the same, more sanctions. And those sanctions have achieved nothing. I mean, they made economic life in North Korea more difficult, but Kim Jong-un isn't fazed about that. He's just building more missiles, more nuclear bombs. And of course, there's now rumors that he's now well advanced to getting himself a nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine, which would, by the way, enable him, if he was able to build a thing like that, he could position it somewhere in the Pacific, and it could probably reach much of the United States that way.
Raphael says, when China is telling the British that they are watching too much 007, when China is toying around with you like this openly, the West is not well.
And it's true. Absolutely. I mean, the Chinese, by the way, have had a wonderful time ridiculing the latest James Bond film, No Time to Die, which I, by the way, watched a little time ago. I found it a very mixed bag, some good things and some not so good things, but let's not get distracted by that.
You don't want to spoil. No spoilers.
No spoilers. but as I said, the Chinese have been enjoying themselves, and of course, it's always important to remember that the Chinese have history with Britain. If you go to Beijing, you will find there the ruins of the summer palace of the emperor, which the Ming Yuan, which was burnt down by the British, by the Elgin expedition in 1860. And the Chinese have never forgotten it, and they've left it there as a reminder. And of course, the Chinese also remember very, very well the way the British forced opium onto them. I mean, fought all those wars when the Chinese were trying to stop the importation of opium, which was creating a massive addiction problem through China. And the British forced them through war to allow the unrestricted sale of Indian opium in China. And of course, the Chinese have never forgotten that. So the Chinese have history with the British, and the British don't seem to get it. And they've been making a lot of strange moves recently, sending the HMS Queen Elizabeth II floating around the South China Sea and things like that. And of course, the Chinese are now ridiculing the British, making it as that the British are, a dwarf, a little midget that's trespassing onto the land of the giants, which isn't really that wrong. And they're teasing the British over things like James Bond, which they know the British care a lot about. So, we're probably going to see more of this.
How about Andrew? How about that news?
Well, that is.
Should we save this for a video?
We should really, but I mean, just to quickly say, I mean, this morning it was the big headlines in all the newspapers here, and the big story. I mean, it's interesting to see how it's happened, and I think this judgment that the judge made, I think I think Andrew's legal team thought that it would go the other way. And of course, the fact that the Judge Kaplan, made the decision she did, I think that's, that was the final straw. And by the way, it's important to say quickly that Andrew used to be the Queen's favorite child. I mean, she doted on him. So for her to cut him off like this it's big news.
Yeah. Mike Watts, thank you for your super sticker. Appreciate it. Kurt says, how would a legal process to claim protection through the Nuremberg Code look like in a European country?
It's a very good question. The Nuremberg Code is not, I think, directly enforceable in most European courts. What European courts tend to follow is EU law, the Court of the European Court of Human Rights, the law of the European Court of Human Rights, which is based on the European Convention on Human Rights, and of course the domestic law of the national states. There is beyond it there is of course the various legislations, the sort of world international law, much of which has been structured around the Nuremberg principles and incorporates the Nuremberg principles to some degree, but the domestic courts of each country interpret it in their own way. So it would be a major, major challenge to do. The Nuremberg principles are not an empty thing, however. If somebody had deep pockets and was prepared to fight a case and go on doing it over 10 years, provided they were able to find judges who were prepared to listen, you could conceivably bring a case of that kind. But it's a question of finding the right judges.
Yeah. From Ventus Bruma, if the Republicans get a veto-proof majority, there might not be as much gridlock as you think, which is actually possible given how unpopular Biden is.
Well, indeed, it might not be, but I mean, then that, of course, begs the question: would the Republicans themselves be united, and would they use the opportunity which was given to them? And up to now, I'm not sure about that. I mean, Mitch McConnell still has, it seems to me, some levers to pull. He's still there. He still wants to be there after the midterms. So, it's always a question with the Republicans of which Republicans.
Yeah. A wild Tom appears. Thank you both for your important work and analysis. Thank you very much for that super chat. From Freedom Autopsy Report, the current Democratic Party in America is not the party of Thomas Jefferson or Andrew Jackson. It's the party of Marx, Lenin, Mao, and Pol Pot.
Well, it's certainly not the party of Jefferson or Jackson.
They hate Jefferson.
They hate Jefferson.
They hate Jefferson.
They hate Jefferson, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
They're not that keen on Jackson either, by the way.
They don't like
there's
they don't like any American. They don't like George Washington.
Washington, exactly. I mean, they're not keen on any of them. But you don't have to go back that far. If you go back to, say, JFK, if you listen to some of JFK's speeches, I mean, he is, profoundly different from the Democrats of today. And, I think fundamentally, I agree. I think if you listen to Democrats, especially on the progressive wing, they talk a language, a socialistic language, a Marxist language in many cases, which is completely alien to the American political and tradition, the political tradition of the United States. So it's surprising in some ways that it has gained as much traction as it has.
They're neoliberals. And
they're neoliberals.
A lot of the neoliberals, like AOC and these people, they just try to hide behind the socialist,
I agree,
progressive moniker. But they are neoliberals.
I agree with that, actually.
Yeah,
absolutely.
They believe in big business working with the state in order to rule over.
Yeah,
over the
they have an oligarchic outlook, which they conceal with an awful lot of socialistic,
progressive
bubbly language, burbling language, which actually really doesn't mean a great deal. but which is, as I said, still nonetheless alien to the American political tradition. In the old days, in the days of Jackson and Jefferson, politicians said what they thought. That's the difference. That was what the United States, by the way, was supposed to be all about. I'm old enough to remember the days when Americans took pride in the fact that Americans were able to say what they believed and what they thought. They compared that with other countries where that was impossible. Well, you can't say that about America today.
Yeah. Thank you, Thomas Gibson, for that super sticker. Thank you very much for that. Iktulu says, is the world silent on the DARPA leak? Why does no one care what caused the situation?
You know, that is such a good point. I'm afraid we have to be so careful now what we say. And what is particularly infuriating about this is that, of course, there has been commentary about this in some parts of the mainstream media. I mean, I read National Review, which is, to say it straightforwardly, a rhino journal, and it's pretty mainstream, and it's been covering this story. Of course, they're not going to get into any trouble if they discuss this properly and fully and make exactly the same kind of talking points that we might do. But we have to be incredibly careful. On locals, we can be much more forthright. In fact, we can be fully forthright. So maybe it's something we ought to talk about there. But all I would say is it's a huge issue. It's a big, big story. That whole story is enormous. And it does beg lots of questions about what was going on. And I should say, by the way, and here I want to make an admission, right at the beginning, when people were saying, this might be what happened, I was skeptical. I was one of those people who tended to say, well, it doesn't seem to me as if the case has been made that anything really bad was happening. I don't really see any evidence of any connection. All the people who are talking about this are going far beyond the facts. Well, now we have the facts, and they bear out, it seems to me, what all those people were saying. And so I was wrong to be skeptical.
Yeah. And,
the fact that we're not able to discuss it freely makes one wonder what exactly is being concealed, or what it is that people don't want to talk about. I apologize again for the fact that I have to talk in this way. I've just answered a question a previous question, say that once upon a time, Americans took pride in the fact that they could always say what they thought and what they believed. Nowadays, on American platforms, you can't do that.
Yeah. We are on Getter, everybody. We are on Gab as well. We are on Minds. We're ODYSEE, Rumble, BitChute. Where else are we? We're on Parler. We still have our Parler account. And yes, Locals, to join Locals is free to join, and you can consume the content.
Absolutely.
And the only part where you pay the $5 a month on Locals is if you want to put comments or post your own news to the homepage feed. But definitely join us on those platforms. I mean, especially Locals, you'll get a lot of content. You'll get a lot of content to consume. So the Duran.locals.com. Definitely join us there. Also go to Duran TV. We have all our videos on durantv.com, where we just play all the videos just back to back to back to back. Just streaming nonstop, 24/7. So also check out Duran TV as well. So we're on a lot of different platforms.
Yes.
You can find us. Amrit says Sweden cannot join NATO. Russia will oppose heavily. Already Norway and the Baltic states share borders with Russia and are in NATO. Russia will not want another missile base in another of its border nations.
I'm not quite sure what Russia will do, but I'm going to say something else. I don't think Sweden is going to join NATO, not at any time now. And I think that even the most reckless people in the US, even the Victoria Nulands, probably realize that at this particular moment in time, any move to get Sweden into NATO is going to provoke a crisis in Eastern Europe, which the United States is simply not ready for. I say that maybe I'm overestimating Duran's grasp of realities, but I think she ought to read some of the commentaries that some American military people have been writing, which I've been reading recently. Not just people like Scott Ritter, whose commentaries about this are extremely concerning about the state of the NATO militaries, but other military people too. Anyway, to progress, I also think that there would still be a lot of opposition within Sweden itself to Sweden joining NATO. I think Sweden has a long history of neutrality, and I think most Swedes at the moment would not be willing to give that up, even though, and I think that the part of the political establishment that wants it is probably still relatively small. But I want to make a further point, which is that though Sweden is nominally outside NATO, historically its relations with Russia have always been bad. And to all intents and purposes, and even during the Cold War, it was a reliable US and NATO ally. So Swedish neutrality has always to some extent been nominal. But the point about missile bases in Sweden is a good one that the Russians would almost certainly treat as a no-no. And I mean, that would provoke, as I said, an immediate and overwhelming military response, maybe not so much in Sweden itself, but certainly elsewhere in Eastern Europe, which I think would rapidly negate that. I don't want to go into too many details for obvious reasons.
All right. Yes, we are on Super U and on Odyssey as well. If I didn't mention that as well. So you can find us there. Where am I here? Freedom Autopsy report says, I would not be shocked if the Democrats surrender to China and declare fealty to Xi in exchange to keep power. Today's Democrats are Marxists.
Well, it's not, I think, entirely impossible that they could pursue some kind of rapprochement with China, which would be very much on Chinese terms. I mean, they might not put it in quite that way, but there has already been discussions. There is now active discussion, and within the administration, of lowering the tariffs to China to get more Chinese goods into the United States in order to bring down the inflation numbers. So, I mean, there is that talk, and that, to be quite absolutely clear, if that were to happen, that would in effect be an economic capitulation. And it essentially amounts to the same thing as what you've been saying. It hasn't happened yet. I think the Democrats understand, or at least some of them do, that doing something like that would go down so badly in the sort of blue-collar regions of the United States, which used to be the electoral core of the Democratic Party, that they're not quite yet prepared to go that far. But who knows, if things get really desperate, if the option of a war that Alex was talking about, which I still think is much more likely, if the option of a war is not going to be pursued, maybe out of desperation, they might turn to that, and they might go cap in hand to Beijing and say, look, we're slashing our tariffs, and we're reversing all the steps that Donald Trump took, and send us more of your goods, we'll send you more of our dollars, and we'll go back to the happy days that existed between Clinton and Obama. And that's what we would prefer to see. The Chinese, by the way, would pocket all of that, and I suspect they'd continue with their other preparations, their military buildups and all the rest. It would play into their hands entirely.
Yeah, Raphael says, where am I here? Raphael says, Russia is not talking about Ukraine in the discussion. Russia wants all U.S. troops out of Europe and Asia, completely out. People are not getting it.
You know, Raphael, I'm so glad you said that. You've been the first person I know who's made that point. And you are absolutely right. You read Western commentaries about the discussions that have taken place over the course of this week. Westerners believe or choose to believe that that they're about Ukraine. and that the Russians are talking about Ukraine. And you see the people in NATO, you see the US officials, you see Wendy Sherman thinking that way. They're fixed on Ukraine, even though the Russians have gone out of their way to say it's not about Ukraine. Yes, Ukraine is a part of this, an important part of this. But what we are talking about isn't just about Ukraine. It is about our overall security position. It's about our overall security position in Europe. And that's why we want legally secure, legally binding security guarantees. And we want to see all that NATO infrastructure in Eastern Europe taken down and taken away. And I don't think that Western officials understand this. I think that they can't compute it. I think that for them to be told that, it's not about Ukraine, it's about these other issues, is just something that is so outlandish to the Western powers. The idea that they could be asked to retreat on where NATO has already gone, that they don't really believe that the Russians are serious. They imagine that this is all leading up to some kind of denouement in Ukraine itself, which isn't, I think, what the Russian game plan is about at all. And you've just seen it now, where the Russians, I think, really rather sneakily brought up this question of Russia installing military infrastructure in Venezuela and Cuba. Now, if you actually look at the way it was done, it's done in a very clever way, because it's a question that was put to the Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov. He was answering a question. He said, well, we're not going to exclude it, and we're not going to include it. I'm not going to confirm or deny whether that option exists. So he appeared to leave that open. And that, of course, immediately set alarm bells ringing in Washington. And we had Jake Sullivan coming out and saying, well, it's absolutely unacceptable for the Russians to put infrastructure in Cuba or Venezuela. And if they do, the United States will react. And of course, what Sullivan doesn't seem to grasp is that he's walked straight into another verbal trap, because the Russians will make a record of that. And the next time this comes up, they'll say, well, look, if you're so sensitive about our infrastructure being installed in Latin America, why do you think it's different for us about your infrastructure that's been installed in Eastern Europe? And of course, Sullivan and the Americans have no real
answer. Is Sullivan? He doesn't realize that he's walking into a trap, or that the Russians are trolling him.
Absolutely, exactly.
How dumb are these guys?
I know. Yeah, I mean, the right thing, the clever thing to do is to shrug one's shoulders.
I mean, all of us, everyone in the chat and the stream understands that the Russians were trolling him when they say we're going to move all our weapons into Venezuela. I mean, he doesn't realize that he's walking into it.
No.
These guys are idiots.
But they are idiots. I mean,
they're idiots.
They're idiots. I mean, Jake Sullivan is a perfect example of the principle that an expensive education doesn't buy you intelligence. It doesn't buy you brains.
Matt Dugas, 139 Canadian dollars. Thank you very much, Matt, for that awesome super chat. The last reset was 2022 years ago in the Society of the Time. In which year was the last day?
Right, I'd have to do some. I've never been particularly good at numbers. I'm not quite sure.
The last reset was 2022 years ago in the Society of the Time. In which year was the last day?
Well, that sounds a little bit like, maybe, is it a biblical reference? Is there something to do with Moses, perhaps, taking the tablets down from Mount Sinai? I'm not sure. I mean, I've never been particularly good with arithmetic, I'm afraid, but that would
2022 years ago. Zariel says the birth of Jesus.
Jesus? No. I mean,
2022 years ago.
Oh, of course. Yes, of course. Well, that's absolutely true. I'm going to just say,
Zariel to the rescue.
Very, very good. Sorry. Yes, now I understand it. Can I just say something? I mean, there's actually quite a lot of archaeology now about that period of the late first century. And because my aunt was culture minister, I sort of in Greece, I used to know quite a lot. I still know quite a lot of archaeologists and people like that, and I get sort of words about, and I take an interest in that kind of thing. And one of the things that it discovered apparently over the last 20 or so years is that there was a very sudden change in the first century AD in burial practices right across the Eastern Mediterranean. And they now think that this was connected with the spread of Christianity at that time. So it happened apparently much faster than had been appreciated until fairly recently. Just saying.
All right. What's going on with Nord Stream 2, Alexander?
Well, what is going on with Nord Stream 2? Of course, I'm going to make it looks to me as if
since we're getting religious.
We're getting religious. What I think has happened with Nord Stream 2 is, of course, we've now had this attempt by the US, by the administration has scuppered Ted Cruz's attempt to block Nord Stream 2. Now, I can't help but believe that this has happened after strong protests behind the scenes from the German government. Now, we've been hearing an awful lot about Baerbock and the Greens, who are, of course, opposed to Nord Stream 2. But I think in private, the Social Democrats, who are very, very tied up with the German trade union movement and who have connections, obviously they also have connections to the German business community. Lots of German business people are Social Democrats. It's not quite the same as it is in some other places but anyway, and I think the Social Democrats probably do want to see Nord Stream 2 completed. So what I think is going to happen is the Biden administration is not going to impose these sanctions, which would have killed Nord Stream 2 had they been imposed. So that now leaves it open for the German regulator to give it the regulatory stamp of approval sometime in June, April, between April and June. So I think it's likely we're going to see Nord Stream 2
in the summer. Yeah.
In the summer.
Good. We're going to need that gas. In the summer.
It's going to fulfill. I hadn't appreciated the sheer volumes of it. It's going to apparently fulfill something like between 10 and 15% of European energy, natural gas needs. So this is a very, very big project, even bigger than I'd understood it would be.
Yeah, but Putin's going to be able to now control all of Europe.
Of course, it's going to
master plan.
Yeah, absolutely. He's the spider, all these pipelines that he's webbed, that he's extending all over Europe. He's going to strangle us in this web of pipelines. That's clearly what he's up to. And of course, that's clearly his game plan. And we're falling straight into it.
Exactly. Hey, man says rocket barrage in Iraq, uninvited and won't leave.
Oh, true enough. Yeah, I mean that is another thing. It's also happening in Syria, by the way, and I'm hearing there's reports circulating in the Middle East that the Pentagon is quietly pulling out some of its troops from Syria. We don't quite know how many there are. Officially, about 1,000. Some people think it's more than that. Nobody seems to know exactly how many. But anyway, that these troops are coming under increasing pressure, and that some of them are being pulled out. Again, nobody has explained to me what the plan behind these deployments actually is. I mean, once upon a time, there was a plan which was to overthrow Assad. It's not going to happen now. Nobody believes it. So why are these troops being kept there? All they're doing is creating an instability in the Middle East, which doesn't work to the US advantage. At least, so I would have thought.
Let's see here. Let's jump into locals here. The minister's decision has been appealed to the same judge that overturned his original visa cancellation. Should be an interesting hearing. Yeah. Djokovic is going to go to the same judge, Alexander.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting. Now, of course, it's a very good question is because... again, I don't want to sound, like I'm, shall we say conspiracist, but telephone justice in other words, cause to the court to explain to the court that there's a particular judgment would tread on political sensitivities. That does happen in Western societies. So it'll be interesting to see whether the judge will follow the logic of the same decision that he did before.
Yeah, Morrison has placed a lot of his political capital on taking on Djokovic. A lot of his political capital.
I cannot understand the politics of this, because if he loses badly. He's humiliated, and if he wins, what has he gained? I mean, it seems to me it's using a sledgehammer to crush a butterfly. I mean, it's not a good look. However you treat it.
It's a terrible look.
Yeah.
And people that cheer it on they don't understand what they're wishing for.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Plans to live stream on Odyssey. Yeah, we'll take a look at it. We'll take a look at it.
Yeah.
And see how we can live stream on multiple platforms.
Yeah.
What's going on in Italy? Any updates on Italy?
Well, talk that Draghi wants to become president. The current president is due to retire. Draghi wants to become president. Of course, if he becomes president, he can't be prime minister. That opens up politics in Italy again, and this at a time when the conservative, the right-wing parties seem to be getting stronger once more, and also at a time when the European Central Bank is edging towards monetary tightening in the wake of what the Fed is likely to do in the US. Now, that will be very, very difficult for Italy because of the very heavy debt burden there. I wonder, in fact, whether Draghi wants to become president because he can see that the writing is on the wall, and that this period of loose monetary policy that he, to some extent, initiated when he was chair of the European Central Bank, whether that's coming to an end. And he understands that that's dangerous, and he wants to sort of get out while he can and get himself into a position of power, which in Italy, the presidency has a lot of power. So anyway, with Draghi off the scene, with the economics starting to shift, that could reopen Italian politics again. And at that point, Italy might start to become politically much more interesting. We'll see.
And Draghi just doesn't disappear, does he?
No. Nor do any of
these guys.
People. Nor do any of these people.
I'm telling you.
Yeah.
These guys just don't disappear. Incredible. Let's see. My friend is being fired in New York City. New York City still has citywide jab requirements for all private employees. Yeah. Yeah, if a private company wants to in the U.S., if they want to fire you, they can still fire you.
Absolutely, of course they can.
After this Supreme Court decision, what it does is it lets companies that weren't taking that route, it lets them off the hook, which is a good thing. Let's see where else. Canada is about to double down and go nuclear with mandated jabs.
Yes. Unsurprising given the complexity of the government there. But given the feelings a lot of Canadians have about that government, I would have thought that that's again playing with fire.
Yeah. Trudeau. Let's see here. From Cogito ergo sum, rumor of new Ebola-like hemorrhage fever with 50% survival rate emerging in China. Any information?
None. I haven't heard anything about that.
I've heard of the discovery of the Deltacron is what they're calling it.
Right,
in Cyprus.
I know they're mangling our alphabet, Alex. We should be offended.
Sounds like a transformer. The Deltacron. It's just getting ridiculous.
It is, yes.
So ridiculous. Let's see. I have a question for you both. It's from Raphael. Are you guys impressed with what Benzema is doing this year? Is Benzema the best player in Europe right now? Is Benzema the best player in Europe right now?
Is this about tennis?
Football. Benzema.
Football? No, I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, I know that most of the world follows football, but I'm afraid I don't, not to any great extent. So I have to give a pass on that one. Alex,
he is one of the best, no doubt about it. This I agree with you, Raphael. He's quite an incredible player. Life of Brian says Biden, despite his bad week, is keeping 90% of his left base. To note how minuscule the anti-Democrat Jimmy for left is.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Democrats will support Biden because, as far as they're concerned, he is the Democrat president. I get the sense that there's a lot of disillusionment even amongst Democrats, even amongst the left. They may still say they would vote for him in opinion polls. That doesn't mean they're happy with him. An opinion poll rate, an approval rating of 33% suggests very, very low approval, even amongst left of center voters.
Yeah. From Leafy Bug, I have often wondered if there is some way to modify the draft so family members of DC decision makers and thought leaders of a suitable age are liable to be called up and placed in harm's way in the event of war. It seems to me these people have become much too far removed from the consequences of the decisions they are responsible for.
That is profoundly correct. That is very, very, very true. And can I just say, in Britain, I noticed the change. When Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister and the Falklands War happened in 1982, virtually all the political leadership of Britain, both in the Conservative Party and in the Labour Party, had served in some form in the war, had been lived through the war. They'd all had, many of them had direct military experience. Several of them had been army officers and had experienced combat. And then about 20 years later, 10 years later, 10, 15 years later, you got Blair, and they were all civilians, and they had no real understanding of war or of the face of war. And they behaved, of course, with a recklessness and an irresponsibility about war, which only civilians, to my mind, could do. And I think you've got that problem also in the United States. Now, I'm sure some of you have all been hearing about Andrei Martyanov, this Russian who I think does programs from the United States. I think he lives in the United States, but he's a former Soviet military officer. He constantly harps on this point. I mean, I'm not always able to follow many of the points Martyanov makes, but on this one, I think he's right. I think the trouble is that you have a civilian leadership in the United States populated by civilian ideologues who have little grasp of what war actually involves and what it means. And this is to a great extent the reason for many of the failures of American military interventions around the world, and for the extraordinary willingness, the recklessness with which America, or at least the leadership of America, invites war. So if we were in a situation where more American politicians and their children were at risk as a result of these kind of decisions, maybe, possibly, probably, we would see more sensible politics followed. Unfortunately, precisely because of that, I can say with almost total confidence that I cannot imagine any US government extending the draft in that kind of way.
Yeah. Let's see. Filipina Traveler TV. How would a process to claim protection from the Nuremberg Code look like in a European? Actually, I think we answered.
Yeah, I think we
that
did,
question
yes.
from
I think we
Kurt.
have.
Yes. Thank you very much, though, for that super chat from Hey Man. Did the Chinese just bail out Erdogan?
I have not heard so, but it's possible. But as I understand it, and now I'm starting to read more commentaries about this. If they bailed him out, that would have been a couple of weeks ago. They would have provided him with funds to support the lira, and of course, there's increasing evidence that he was involved, or at least Turkish intelligence was involved in the events in Kazakhstan. So if the Chinese gave him money, well, all I would say is he's bitten the hand that feeds him. Now, he does this repeatedly and all the time. And one of the wonders of international politics is the way in which country after country, government after government, falls for this time and again. And one wonders what will happen for this to stop. I suspect with Kazakhstan, we are closer to having this stop. By the way, on that topic, one of the things I've been reading recently, and it seems it's true, is that one of the reasons why the Russians have always pursued favorable policies towards Turkey, despite of endless provocations, is that they were always very anxious to keep Kazakhstan on side. And Nazarbayev, who was the president of Kazakhstan, was a very close friend of Erdogan's and was constantly lobbying in Moscow for Russia to maintain good terms with Turkey. So with Nazarbayev off the scene, Erdogan has lost an important ally in terms of the political debates about Turkey that take place in Moscow.
From Kurt, from today, time to admit failure. That's a quote. Leading immunologist Professor Ehud Kimron tells Israel Ministry of Health. Time to admit failure. We're hearing that a lot now, actually.
Indeed. Well, true enough, Western politicians can't bear to admit failure. It's something that they find extremely difficult to do. I mean, they can't, especially over a topic like this, I suspect, because they're so invested in it now. So admit failure, I can't see them doing it. They might quietly accept failure, but that's a different thing from admitting it.
Yeah. They're trying to talk out of both sides of their mouth. So you can see like the CDC director and even Dr. F, they've been kind of, saying some comments which are very unusual to hear coming out of them with regards to hospitalizations and things like that.
Yes.
You can see they're trying to figure out a way to get out of this mess that they've created.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. Moon Dragon says, Jen's NATO man seemed to be a bit nervous during the summit. Is he finally realizing that the danger NATO may face since Russia does not compromise?
You're absolutely right. Several people made the same observation during my live stream, and of course, you only have to see the film to see this. He looked nervous and tired. He was stammering. He was he just wasn't putting forward a coherent thing. I think what happened was that he was exposed to the full force of Russian arguments from Grushko and Fomin. Fomin is a military man, by the way. He comes from the defense ministry, and I think he was unnerved by it, and I think he's also very unnerved by the fact that there seems to be some kind of ongoing debate within the United States, which argues that we've now reached the limit where NATO is concerned. We've got to try and find some way to pull back without humiliating ourselves. So I think Stoltenberg, I think his manner was actually more interesting than his actual words. His words didn't deviate from his usual cliches and mantras, but his manner, I think, basically gave it away. It showed that he realizes that in reality, behind all the bluster, everything is now changed, and that the security systems, the process of relentless NATO expansion has now hit a wall.
Elena Diaz says, any more news about Erdogan and Turkey's involvements in Kazakhstan? How will the failed coup affect Western gas companies?
There is a vast amount of rumors about this. There's even rumors that there was what's called an operations room. An operations room is a kind of headquarters, a kind of covert headquarters run by Turkish intelligence in Almaty, and that they were sort of controlling the protests from it. So there's lots of rumors, but of course, rumors are one thing, facts are something else. So, one can't be sure that these rumors are in themselves true. But I think that there is a widespread feeling that the Turkish intelligence did play some kind of a role in this, by assembling these people, by organizing them, by providing them training in the camps, in the various camps there are in Turkey for this sort of thing. So there's an accumulation of indications, and there's a vast amount of rumor. And the other thing that, of course, seems very indicative is that Turkey is now going out of its way to try to reassure the Kazakh government that they weren't involved. And they're doing it to such an extent that it does make one wonder whether perhaps they're protesting too much, as we say in Britain, and whether it really does show that they were in some form involved. So a lot of clues, but for us to actually discuss how it was done and what was actually going on, we still need facts. There's an investigation within Kazakhstan of what happened. Thousands of people have been arrested. You can be sure that they're all being questioned. And you can be sure, by the way, that some of those questioners are people from Russia who are, professionals in interviewing prisoners and getting answers out of them. So I'm not hinting, by the way, at anything bad there. I mean, there's ways of asking questions which eventually extract answers. And I think before very long, we will get a much clearer picture of what did in fact happen in Kazakhstan. Lots of unanswered questions for the moment.
Yeah. JT63 has an excellent summary as to the U.S.-Russia negotiations, 3 parts from what I see. So I'll leave that up there for you, Alexander, to take a look at it. But let me read you the first part, a couple bullet points. Russia has a clear plan and objectives around security. U.S. has none. Russia has escalatory dominance across Western Europe. Leakage of Russian firing missiles hitting targets in NATO countries is far greater than the NATO firing missiles at Russia. Same in relation to air supremacy and land troops. And Russia uses agile and composable organizational strategies to produce military hardware far faster. And there's more in that summary, so I will definitely leave that up. But
excellent.
Really good summary.
It sounds incredibly good, actually.
Yeah,
and I think everybody should read it. I certainly
thank you for that. Thank you for that summary. And Biden, Cheney, 2024. How about that?
Well, it wouldn't be quite, yeah. Well, they always used to say that Cheney basically ran the George W. Bush administration. Might have been a bit unfair, actually. I always thought that people were too dismissive of George W. Bush. I think there was more to him than people said. But Cheney was certainly a dominant vice president. Perhaps he's intending
will be the same.
Will be the same. Maybe she wants to. They want to repeat it. Maybe this is the. I mean, we have the a Biden Cheney administration, except of course that it'll be Liz who's really running everything. Well, who knows?
Yeah. Boy, they must be really desperate if they're floating that idea out there. My God,
it would be desperate beyond desperate. I mean, it would be not going to the lowest point of the gutter. It would be going below the gutter. I mean, that's a hopeless idea.
Zariel says, point of the North Korea ICBMs on Tuesday. The U.S. had their first national grounding since 9/11, and then it was West Coast for California, 15-20 minutes, so still foggy.
Yeah. Well, there we go. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you, Zariel,
for
that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kurt, for that super chat as well.
I just wanted to say something. There is a mystery about the speed of the North Korean ballistic missile program and nuclear program, and I mean that's not been resolved. Now, I mean, North Korea is not quite the bankrupt place that some people say. I mean, it clearly has an industrial base. It's clearly got a chemical industry. It clearly is able to make machine tools. It clearly has some kind of computer industry as well. But even if you accept all of that, even if you assume that North Korea has significant industrial and technological assets. I have to still say that the speed of development of these weapon systems is astonishing. And I can't help but wonder how it's been achieved and whether some external help hasn't been provided by someone.
I wonder who that someone is.
Yeah.
Let's see. Ryan says, recently you two discussed the election in France. What is stopping Zemmour and Le Pen from forming an alliance? They have to win and remove Macron.
Yeah, I think there's intense rivalry between the two. I think for Le Pen, I think she's furious that Zemmour has undermined her, as she would see it, and I think Zemmour is utterly exasperated with Le Pen because of all her temporizing. I think if either of them got through to the second round, my prediction is that the other would support them. So I mean, if Le Pen got to the second round, Zemmour would, through gritted teeth, support Le Pen. And if Zemmour got through to the second round, I think Le Pen would do the same. And I think, there'd probably be a haggle and there'd be an agreement. Maybe if Zemmour got through to the second round, that Le Pen would be appointed prime minister or something like that. But it's clear that there's intense rivalry between the two. And at the moment, it is giving the Macron and Pécresse, and it makes them look stronger and more popular than perhaps they really are.
Yeah, from Mike, as a former aviation mechanic, I also have studied military aviation. What do you think of the UAE move towards the Su-75? I love your aviation segments.
Well, I'm first of all, I have to say I'm not sure it's going to happen because, of course, I mean, there's the Qatar issue. I mean, UAE buying the Sukhoi 75 would be might provoke sanctions. The US can impose waivers, can give waivers, but I wonder whether the UAE would be willing to do that. That's one. But I have to be careful because where it comes to the Sukhoi 75, this is this new single engine fighter. I don't know first of all, how good or effective it is, but if the UAE were to buy it, it would be such a huge political thing. It would be such a massive repudiation, in effect, of the military relationship with the United States, that even if this is the best fighter jet in the world, I wonder whether the real objective is not from the UAE to buy this fighter jet, but rather to gain leverage and therefore concessions from the US. Because I wonder whether the UAE is really willing to sever that kind of relationship with the US. If it does happen, then be absolutely clear, it's a decisive shift. Because, of course, if the UAE were to start buying Russian fighters and Russian surface-to-air missiles and other equipment, then, of course, Saudi Arabia almost certainly would follow. And that would be a dramatic realignment. And that would change the political geography of the Middle East.
Rocky Luck says, who is likely to replace Stoltenberg for NATO? Is the rumor about Lady May replacing him credible?
You mean Dame Teresa? To give it to put the title correctly. I don't. Oh no, God help us. I don't know. It's a possibility. I mean, it chills the blood, the thought of it. But who's? I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to speculate about it. All I will say is whoever replaces Stoltenberg will be ultimately and fundamentally and in all essentials no different from Stoltenberg.
Well, Stoltenberg's going to be, Stoltenberg is when he's running the central bank.
Absolutely,
in
of course
Norway,
he is.
So.
Of course he is. I mean, because he's been such a great success as Secretary General of NATO, you promote him to run your central bank, and when he makes a mess of things in Norway, you presumably find him a even better job as head of the IMF or the World Bank, or who knows, maybe even running the European Central Bank. I mean, all these possibilities. Of course, Norway isn't in the EU, but when has that ever
stopped them?
Anything, exactly. Yes.
Doesn't stop them.
No.
What a great gig! No matter how badly you mess up, you always get promoted up.
Absolutely, yeah.
What a great career path.
Yeah.
Jeez. Let's see, Ray. Thank you for your super chat. Hey man says, could the Chinese Russians gain access to the Bering Straits and build a bridge to North America as the ice melts? Could Alaska become a hotspot? That would be interesting.
That would be very, very interesting. Well, putting aside, these ambitions, and we're now getting all these reports about a Chinese canal across Nicaragua, which all this talk about Russian systems in Venezuela and Cuba, and as Alex correctly said, that was just trolling, which Jake Sullivan was an idiot to fall for. But the Chinese, if they start getting involved in building canals in Nicaragua, well, that's a much more real challenge to the U.S. position in Latin America. But well, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. So but putting all that aside, Putin and Xi are going to be meeting in February, and that's going to be in the context of the Winter Olympics in Beijing. You can be sure they're talking to each other all the time, and there was a big meeting recently between Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, and Sergei Lavrov. And there's clearly an awful lot of coordination going on, and bridges across the Bering Straits, canals in Central America are one thing, but I think at the moment it's the geostrategic military coordination which is probably at the forefront, as well as the merger of financial systems.
Yeah. There's no decision yet on Stoltenberg. There's massive resistance here in Norway. That's good.
I wouldn't be surprised. Good to hear that, by the way. Yeah.
Good to hear that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Divine Insurgent says, without inciting too much controversy.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on China Uncensored, Lawai and Serpensa? Are they just general anti-China propaganda?
I haven't watched. I don't know this.
China Uncensored. I've watched like a video or two of theirs, I think, but I can't.
Yeah. I have. The sheer volume of material coming out of China or commentary about China is enormous. Now, I follow the Chinese media with, a massive dose of skepticism. By no means assume anything is true. I'm not assuming the factual accuracy of anything I read there, but the commentaries are a good insight into Chinese government thinking. And I have a personal friend who is an academic who's lived in China, who studies China, who writes about China. And he also gives me a great deal of insight, and he's introduced me to all sorts of people, including many Chinese people, by the way. So that gives me some idea of what goes on. And he's, by the way, a critic of the Chinese government. I should make that also clear. Though an informed critic, if I can also say that. So that's where I get most of my ideas about China from. But obviously, it's always useful to see others. I haven't followed China Uncensored. There's so many hours in the day, but
we'll check
maybe
them out.
we should check them out. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Brando Commander said, how did the lira go from $20 to one USD to 11 overnight? Perhaps a secret IMF deal to stir up trouble in Kazakhstan. Maybe the same deal with the US and UK.
This volatility with the lira is not unknown, and all kinds of odd things happen. But can I just say, who knows? Maybe there was a payoff. Maybe it did have something to do with Kazakhstan. One can speculate, but I think one shouldn't analyze too much without actual facts. And at the moment, we don't have facts. We only have guesses. So it's not unusual for the lira to go up, to do all these massive gyrations, because, of course, Erdogan, his back is to the wall. He's doing everything he possibly can. He's coming up with every conceivable dodge and expedient to try and stabilize the economic situation in Turkey. And who knows whom he's turning to, and who knows what deals he's doing.
Dida Pong says, reason for Russia wanting written response to have traceability from NATO agreements through to Russian responses to U.S. and NATO violations.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, by the way. I mean, that's one of the things, again, if you read the interviews that people like Ryabkov and Grushko make, you see that for the Russians to get written responses and to get classified, to have things written out in their archives is very important to them, because what they do before they go into a negotiation is they go through all the previous negotiations, they go through all the diplomatic history, they look through everything that people say, they look at what's been written down, and then they're able to come along and reproduce it in negotiations. Anybody who's negotiated with the Russians, I'm not talking about the Russian government, with Russian businesses, knows what an incredibly tough experience it is. They are phenomenally well briefed. They go through all the documents, all the paperwork with minute, like a tooth comb. And if you said something, 5 years ago, they've made a note of it and they can bring it back. So them getting written responses is extremely important to them. There was one example, actually. There was a discussion. The Americans apparently, during the discussions, brought up some points about the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, where they said that the Soviet delegation had made some changes to its position, which were favorable to the US, and that was still what the US was relying upon. And the Russians went back to the archives. They had all the stenographic records, went through the stenographic record, and over the course of the discussions themselves, apparently they were able to correct the error. So that's what the advantage of having things in writing does for you.
Yeah. Henry Walker says, how will interest rate hikes affect Bitcoin? What are your predictions for the crypto market in 2022?
For Alex to respond. I don't know. I mean,
I can't make a prediction on Bitcoin. Interest rate hikes, I don't know how that's going to affect Bitcoin either. Some people say the price will go up. Some people say the price will go down due to the interest rate hikes. I don't know.
My own. Yeah. This is a guess. It's a pure guess. I don't think the interest rate hikes in themselves are going to make much difference. It's the inflation numbers you need to look at.
Yeah. So not financial advice.
No. Well, but that's not financial advice. Absolutely. That's just it's just a guess.
Yeah, look, Bitcoin and a few other coins, I hold them more long term, so I'm not so concerned how they do month to month or even year to year.
Exactly.
So, you just gotta watch the markets and read up as to what's going on and make good guesses. At the end of the day, Raul Pinto says, thanks to the Duran community, I have moved out of NYC and bought a house close to the farms. As I see the West collapsing, both morally and economically. Congratulations, Raul,
congratulations
on that purchase. And we wish you the very best. From Leafy Bug says, maybe Sullivan isn't stupid in that he didn't realize he was walking into a trap, which would allow the Russians to raise U.S. double standards. I think Sullivan operates in a world in which it's taken for granted that the U.S. can impose these kinds of blatant double standards on countries like Russia without consequences. He's living in the past, like most of the DC bubble.
Yes, but you see, that's the point, because if he was clever, he would understand that he's living in the past. He would sense that the ground is moving under his feet, and he would be agile enough to adjust to it. The problem is he doesn't seem to be able to adjust to it. And I think that was why, as I said, he fell for a bit of trolling that the Russians were playing. And it was cleverly done.
Yeah. Let's see here. Taffy4 says, I predict negative interest rates and bank bail-ins.
You may very well be right. I mean, a lot of people have been saying that, in fact, if there is going to be a monetary tightening, it's not going to last for very long, and that we're going to see it reversed as soon as possible. And at the first opportunity, they'll reverse it, even if inflation numbers start going up again, because the underlying debt situation in the economy is now such that there really isn't any alternative.
Yeah. Just seen on CNN, had a guest who suggested Joe Rogan should be removed from Spotify.
Oh,
Yeah,
goodness.
I saw that too.
Oh, yeah.
Ridiculous.
Ridiculous, yeah.
Absolutely ridiculous. Yeah.
Well, it's becoming compulsive also. You don't agree with someone, deplatform them, cancel them, ban them, prohibit them. I mean, this seems to be now, as I said, becoming addictive.
Yeah. Let's see. New merch on the Duran shop coming soon.
Coming soon, absolutely.
Coming soon. Definitely. Hunger says the great Carl Schmitt said the only meaningful political distinction is that between friends and enemies, which explains all these strange alliances.
Yeah, I think that's true. Carl Schmitt, very interesting man, by the way. He's come very much back into fashion. He was an international relations theorist and a lawyer who became very prominent in Germany during the Nazi era, and who was inevitably, to some extent, affected. I mean, his reputation was severely damaged by the fact that he gained prominence during that period and appeared to endorse some of the policies followed by Germany during that period. But people who've read him nonetheless agree that he is actually an extremely clever and very insightful man.
Yeah. The CIA should be removed from CNN. Yeah, I agree with that. Well said. Well said.
There wouldn't be anything left.
Yeah, CNN would close shop. Yeah, absolutely. Matt Dugas, $139 super chat. Thank you very much,
Wow.
Matt Dugas. Wow. What if we were to stop fighting and FN around and pool our resources and pay homage to God and family, show our understanding and build back better the pyramids? There is a purpose and be better to do with machines than by hand.
Well, I mean, I personally think that the United States, if it modifies its foreign policy, if it starts to look to its own problems, if it starts to do some of the things that you appear to be suggesting there, if it follows, in effect, an intelligent America first policies, its inherent strengths, its latent strengths remain tremendous. And you would very, very rapidly see a fundamental transformation in the US and an economic boom, a real economic boom. But what stands in the way is the sort of this coalition of interests that wants to keep the US heading in the wrong direction, and the ideology that underpins it.
Yeah. David says, watching the EU-NATO spar over Ukraine continues to remind me of Austria-Hungary circa the beginning of World War I.
Yeah, I think the similarities are profound.
Yeah.
By the way, we're doing our historical series, so we've now reached a rather interesting inflection point in the historical series, but we've touched on the First World War already. And if you go to locals, you can follow that. And we touch on the points about Austrian-Hungarian policies. And I think your point is well made.
Yeah, there's a playlist on YouTube for the historical series, which touches upon this point that you're making. Absolutely. Yeah. Kurt says, I heard that the Australian Open is to be rebranded to the Australian Closed. In any case, I will not be watching if Novak Djokovic cannot play. Well said, Kurt.
Very good. Very great. Yeah.
All right. Yes. Very well said there. And Casey says, make Istanbul, Constantinople again, make Kazakhstan, Russia again, make the U.S. an isolationist country again. God bless the Duran in 2022.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Casey. And Kurt says, as royals throughout history have had a very active private life, why do they think that the serious Prince Andrew case comes up now? Hidden agenda.
Well, I think we should do a program about this. There may very well be a hidden agenda. I do wonder whether Andrew isn't, the sacrifice that has been presented in order to, to distract us from all the rest. You could say, well, look,
we got to do a video. Yeah.
Well, we've got to do a video.
Go on. You're on a good path. Keep on going.
Briefly, we, of course, we've had this reckoning with all the people with, with all the terrible things that happened. Look, it's not just Ghislaine, it's not just Max, Epstein himself. Why we've even gone again after the royal. So I think there may very well be that agenda, because I was reading a short time ago after the Ghislaine trial, all sorts of people were saying, well, now is the moment when there's going to be this deal done, that she's going to do this deal to get a reduced sentence, and she's going to name all these people. Have you heard anything about that since then? That's that's several days, a week now, isn't it? Nothing has happened. Instead, we're all talking about Andrew, and notice that has no connection to the Ghislaine case.
Yeah, I see Ghislaine I see not Ghislaine. I see Andrew very much like what they did to Weinstein.
Yeah.
Like these guys did terrible things.
Yeah.
But there are people that have done worse. But you have to throw someone to the sharks.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see here. We have a couple more super chats from Chase Mail. You're my favorite and most trusted source. Well done, guys. I would love to recommend YouTube creator Robert Sepper and his video Meaning of the Double-Headed Eagle. The history of the double-headed eagle is very interesting.
Oh, interesting. Okay, well, we certainly watch that, given obviously that we have a particular interest in the double-headed eagle, which is our own brand. So definitely, we should follow that. We should look. We should follow that program. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Alan says yes, a video on Prince Andrew and Maxwell, please. Yes, we will do that. Leafy Bug says, Alex, why do you get to shuttle between Greece and Cyprus and various European capitals? Oh, well, I don't know. Just like to travel, I guess. Yeah. Well, Cyprus and Greece is. Yeah. My family's from Cyprus. And
yes. Yeah.
I've been living in Greece for a while, so
yes,
I have a family home there.
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's and the distance. It's not huge. I mean,
1 hour.
1 hour, exactly.
Yeah, it's a 1 hour flight. It's a quick flight, but you have to fill all this paperwork now, which is why I go back to the Australia story and with Djokovic.
Yeah,
travel is not fun anymore.
No,
Alexander, it really isn't.
No. I know. Absolutely. I mean, I should say I never liked flying. I mean, I always had an aversion to it, but I love driving. And I used to go for these big continental journeys, to the Alps, to Berlin. And the last trip was from London to Berlin. Out of the question today. Couldn't possibly do a thing like that today. Far too difficult.
I don't like the preparation anymore.
No, exactly.
You got to fill out. First of all, when you travel to a country, and we'll wrap it up. We got everything, actually. We got everything.
Oh, wow.
But, when you travel to a country, now you have to find out what are the restrictions? Are they quarantining? What are the jabs that they accept? And you got to fill out all the forms. You got to download whatever digital IDs you need. You got to take whatever tests you need, PCR tests, whatever. It's just such a massive pain in the ass.
Absolutely.
And then when you're on the plane, they give you more forms to fill out.
Absolutely. I mean, in effect, we're going back 70 years when, travel was really, really difficult. Very few people did it. And now it's become, again, very, very difficult, and very few people are doing it. And it's one of the great achievements that people had over the last 70 years, that they were able to travel. And now that's all gone into reverse. It's really actually very, very, very sad. And one wonders how long people will accept it.
It reminds me of the Soviet Union. The time that I did spend in the Soviet Union, I remember the people were like everyday people. They were allowed to travel to certain areas within the Soviet Union. I mean, they actually had designated places where they would go on holiday.
Yeah.
The elites, I mean, they were able to travel all throughout Europe.
Absolutely.
But the majority of the people would be, okay, 2 weeks you're going there, and everything is set up for you in this location. That's where you're going to be.
Yeah. Well, that's where we're good. We are reproducing so much of that system. And we're doing it without people seeming to understand.
Yeah,
how
people want it.
Well, a lot of people want it. Yeah.
I mean, that's why people are saying, no, we want more restrictions.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I'm like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah.
What are you asking for?
I think that was true 3 or 4 months, 5 months ago. I think it's becoming less so now. Certainly in Britain, it isn't true anymore.
Yeah. Let's hope. Elena Diaz says, what do you think Germans will negotiate on the 18th of January?
18th of January. I'm not sure
Elena,
what
is going on the 18th of January?
18th of January, yeah.
Could someone in the live stream let us know what's going on 18th January?
18th of January. I mean,
Germany.
I mean, all kinds of, yeah. Day of the founding of the German Empire. Was that the 18th of January? I mean, I seem to sort of, 18th of January, 1871. Whether there's some kind of, I mean, it was German reunification. Whether that German unification, rather, in 1871, Bismarck's. Whether that's there's a commemoration of it. I mean, I don't know. But again, if somebody can provide us with some
mandates in Germany,
mandates.
Here, Sanders has mandates in Germany.
Germany.
Is Germany going into mandates, or they're going to vote on mandates?
I know. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I haven't heard. I haven't heard about this.
We'll see.
We'll see.
The way Germany goes is the way Europe will go. So.
Well, absolutely, of course. That goes without saying.
And hey, man, Super Chat says, the battle of the grifters. The virus has assumed control of the host.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Hey, man, and 17 days left for Russia to invade Ukraine. It's true. They said January.
They said January. Well, of course, now they're saying it won't be January. They say it'll be February because you see the ground is too soft for the Russian tanks. Russia can't. You know, the mighty Russian army is going to be is being prevented from advancing because of a bit of mud. You see, that's the latest. We've got to worry about February, and then of course, when February's nothing happens, well, that will be because you see we're waiting for March because they need the wind at their back to be able to invade. They'll always come up with some explanation why this invasion has been delayed. They'll never admit to the truth that no such invasion was ever planned in the first place.
Okay, 18th of January, Germany talking with Putin. There's rumors that Putin speak.
Okay.
Thank you guys for that.
That is interesting. Well, that is interesting. And by the way, that is also making people like Stoltenberg extremely nervous because I hadn't heard that, by the way. I didn't know that date had been even provisionally agreed. But if there's going to be a virtual summit meeting between the Germans and the Russians, then obviously all sorts of people are worried because they will be worried about what kind of deal the Germans and the Russians do. Because to be very clear, if the Germans and the Russians agree to anything, it sticks. It affects the whole course of policy in Europe. Even the US has to consider it. And last but not least, talks between Scholz and Putin could potentially affect the stability of the German coalition because the Greens have taken this very anti-Russian, pro-Atlanticist line. Scholz, it seems, doesn't want to. He wants some kind of a rapprochement with Russia. So how do you square that particular circle? Who gives in that kind of issue? Will the Greens go along with it? Will they pull out of the coalition? If they do pull out of the coalition, how is it reconstituted? Will there be new elections? Or will the SPD form a new coalition, perhaps involving the CDU? It's not impossible, by the way, not at all. So we'll just have to see. So this is a big event, and we'll see how it turns out. By the way, the French also want to talk to the Russians also.
We'll cover it. Filipino Traveler TV says, would it be possible to bring on Neil Oliver, Scottish TV presenter, which talks about the changes to our society? He's great.
Oh, he's great. And yes,
he's on GBTV, isn't he?
Yeah, he is on GBTV. Yes, but we have been thinking of having people on, and when we can,
we do. It just takes a lot of coordination.
Exactly.
Yeah, but Neil Oliver would be great. Is GBTV doing well?
Well, I think it had gone through it had a very bad start, but the latest I've heard is that it's sort of stabilized, and it might come together. It's not unusual for new TV stations in Britain to have a very rocky start at the beginning before they find their way. So I wouldn't write it off. And what I've heard is it's steadied, and it might be starting to pick up.
They got big names. Mark Stein, I think, is with them too. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Tour of the United States. That would be awesome.
Yeah,
that would be cool.
Yeah.
Definitely, that would be a nice thing to do. That's everything, Alexander. Any final thoughts? Thank you to our moderators, real quick. Reckless Abandon and Zariel, Alan Watson, Cosmic Rain. Did I get everybody? Cosmic Rain, Reckless Abandon, Alan Watson, Zariel. Yeah, that's thank you to our moderators. Thank you very much for your help. Thank you to everyone on our live stream and our chat. Alexander, final thoughts?
Well, just these to say, which is that, of course, I mean, we've been saying this for a while, that the unipolar moment was over, and it is indeed over. I mean, the last few weeks and months have confirmed that indisputably. What we now have is a major power, Russia, telling the United States, I want to stress the globalist elite in the United States, it's telling them enough, stop. And that's a major change, and it tells us lots of things about the shift in the geopolitical situation. And it's one of the reasons why the Biden-Harris administration is unraveling, because, of course, the whole point about the Biden-Harris administration was it was an attempt, in effect, to try to get that project back on the road. And we see how it's unraveling domestically, because it's simply not viable in domestic terms, and it's now collided with realities in the international system as well. So I think we are beginning to see the end of the globalization project. I mean, it's not conclusive yet. There's still an awful lot of steam behind it, a lot of potential for things to go wrong, but we're starting to see the end of it, both in the United States, which is its focus, and around the world.
Okay, two more super chats. Alexander from Raphael. Guys, I have Russian TV package on Roku. Guys, I'm telling you, Russian TV is on the top of the line. The presentation, the production quality is top quality.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Russia won, and
absolutely. Can I just say, and do not judge if you think Russian television is like RT. They are completely different.
Very different.
Very different.
I mean, but Raphael is right.
Absolutely.
Good shows too.
Absolutely, yeah.
Good shows. And Cosmic Rain says Neil Oliver is great. He's been doing well on GB News. He's quite popular. If you can get him on here at some point, that would be great. Absolutely. I love his segments. I watch him on YouTube. And Mark Stein and Nigel Farage are on GBTV, I see here.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, these are Titanic names.
They got heavy hitters on there.
They got some very heavy hitters, yeah.
Good for them. And Cactus Ray sent us a super chat here. That's it. Thank you very much, Cactus Ray, for that. And we'll close it out. Real quick, Alexander, I forgot to ask you what was going to be one of my first questions, which is how long do you think Biden has? This is a serious question.
It's a very serious question. I think the point to look at, I mean, I'm not sure he will get through this year. That's the first thing to say. I think this could very well be the final year. But of course, the big problem is, do they wait until after the midterms or before? The advantage of doing it before the midterms is that it might be easier to carry through the transition process whilst they still have majorities in the House of Representatives and in effect in the Senate than it would be if they waited till after the midterms. So I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about this, but they have to find someone to put in his place, and that's their problem. So what do they've got the Kamala problem. They've got also the problem about what they do if they push Kamala aside. How do they arrange for someone else to take over who's in a position to take the party forward to 2024? And that's enormously complicated. And one wonders whether the sheer complexity of this, which they obviously didn't plan for, is what's keeping this impossible situation with this decrepit presidency going, because they can't find a way around these procedural and problems that they should have anticipated when they nominated him for the presidency in the first place. The great disadvantage of having a kind of El Cid figure, a sort of a dead man on a horse that you send charging into battle, is what do you do after the battle is over? If he's supposed to be behind a desk, how do you remove the corpse without admitting that it is a corpse?
Yeah, they've got no one. They've got no one. Okay, we will leave it there. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great weekend and take care.